Wow, it is fantastic to see so many of you joining us today. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. We truly have a global audience for today's webinar. So wherever you're joining us from, thank you very much for being with us today. I'll start with a very brief introduction before handing over to my colleagues Adam and Roman. So my name is Vicky Hunter. I'm the Portfolio Director for our Business and IT certifications here at PeopleCert, and I'm going to be your moderator for this session. And I have to say, it is my absolute pleasure to welcome so many of you from across the world to the very first of our new MyAxelos webinar series, which is titled the ITIL 4 Practice Guide Masterclasses. For our first webinar today, we're going to focus on how to use the ITIL 4 practice guides. And for this first session, we have opened up access to everyone. So members and non-members are joining us today, which is absolutely fantastic. But just to let you know that the rest of the series will be available exclusively to our members. So the idea behind this series of 8 webinars is to give our members exclusive access to some of the legends and the great minds of ITIL, and you've got 2 of those with you today. We wanted our experts to provide insight into how the ITIL 4 practice guides can help you in your everyday work. And the series builds and goes into detail on the particular areas of the practice guides, and then a little bit more detail towards the end of the series on our new certification releases. The ITIL 4 practices are a topic that members have been asking to hear more about, and we do run a survey at the end of each of our webinars, so please do take a couple of moments to fill that out because that's what helps inform our future webinar programme. I'm sure today's session will be exactly what you've asked for, and in other great news for our members, each webinar can be logged as one CPD point. So if you attend the whole series of 8, you're nearly halfway to your CPD points total for the year. Couple of small kind of admin bits. So the Q&A box will be open throughout the session. Please do add your questions there and we will try to address as many of those as possible. The chat function is closed, so please use the Q&A box. We plan for the presentation to run for around 40-45 minutes and then use the remainder of the time for questions and answers. So that's the introductions done. So without further ado, it's my absolute privilege to introduce you to the aforementioned legends and great minds of ITIL. Today's presenters, I have Adam Griffiths, ITIL Architect, and Roman Zhurev, Chief ITIL Architect. So over to you guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Vicky, and welcome everyone. Really amazing to see so many of you. I see that for some people there is audio issues currently going on. I see that others can hear us well, so maybe try reconnecting. And if you don't succeed, the recording will be shared later. So the webinar is being recorded and we will share the link and it will be published on the free side of the paywall. So it will be available to you after the session and to anyone you would like to share it with later, if it was sharing, for which we will really try working hard. My name is Roman. I'm a senior ITIL architect and I will be presenting most of the time today and answering some of your questions. And Adam will be monitoring the Q&A panel and from time to time bringing some of your questions up if there will be a good moment for them during the presentation. Otherwise, we will reserve about 15 to 20 minutes, depending on how many questions will be coming in, to address those questions at the end of the presentation. Finally, if there are any questions that we cannot address during the presentation, we will make sure to make notes of them and publish the questions later, or the answers later. And this is where, Adam, maybe you would like to say a couple of words about yourself too before we start, and then we will proceed to the slides.
Certainly. What I do want to say is a big thank you to everyone who has made the time to be here today. Roman has prepared a lot of information to share with you. And as he mentioned, while he is presenting, I will be fielding your comments. So we suspect that many of you have either come with questions or that you'll formulate some during the presentation. Either way, we welcome you to drop those into the Q&A, and I'll be providing answers to those as quickly as possible for as many of them as possible. Some, as Roman mentioned, I may hold until the Q&A session at the end, or to maybe drop into the conversation throughout. But as a member of the ITIL architecture team, it is, again, wonderful to have you here today. Roman, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Adam. And let's have a look at the ITIL 4 practices. But before that, just as a reminder, when we think of ITIL, despite that not being officially called a library anymore, we think of books probably. And indeed, we have three major components in the ITIL framework. These are the core books, the core publications, and you probably know the names of those publications. There are management practices, and each of them is described in a dedicated management practice guide. And this is our main topic for today. And also, I would like to mention something that not many people are aware of, and this is ITIL maturity model. We launched it a couple of years ago. It is primarily addressed to the actual consulting partners, but we decided to include some of the elements of that model in the updated practice guides this year, and this is why it's relevant for us to mention that model today as well. When it comes to the books, the first 5 published in 2019-2020 were this. We started with Foundation in February 2019, then Create, Deliver, and Support and Direct Plan and the Proof were published later in the same year. And at the beginning of 2020, the other 2, High Velocity IT and Drive Stakeholder Value, were added to this core set of publications. But not so many people know that at the same time, we were publishing the first practice guides. So the first 4 were published in May 2019, and then the other 30 followed, supporting the respective launch of the pairs of the books. So by, let's say, end of first quarter of 2020, we had 34 practice guides published. And they have been since then available in MyAxelis, where an annual subscription, which is currently about £100 per year. And given that altogether 34 practice guides are about 30-40 pages or up to 50 pages each, give you as much or maybe even more information if you think of our page count than all our core publications taken together, or any of the previous versions of the deck or of the ITIL book collection, ITIL library. It probably is a bit surprising that they are not very well known and not so many people actually use them. The idea when we were publishing them separately from the core publications and as individual publications, not under one single cover, was this. We wanted to make sure that if the actual management practice, let's say change enablement or incident management in the real life, in the industry, in IT service management as we know it today, will evolve and there will be a new fascinating way of managing changes, then we would be able to update their respective practice guide, change enablement practice guide, for instance, and keep up with the pace of the industry development. Because at that point, we were very aware of the fact that the industry had been developing much faster than ITIL. And we wanted to make sure that ITIL will remain relevant and we will be able to update practices in, let's say, microservice rather than a monolithic way. However, they remained almost unknown to a significant part of the target audience for various reasons that we since then analyzed. And this is why now we are really happy to add this until now to the end of this statement. Because as you probably know, although the practice guides have been published and available, there were no training or certification supporting these practice guides. And we realized that in this industry, many people still prefer studying by listening to other people telling them what to do and observing the slides in a presentation rather than reading through some huge page count of knowledge. So This year, we went into a large update project. So we updated 15 practices and published not only their practice guides, but also their supporting training and certification products. And I will tell more about them in this hour. But before going there, I would like to remind those of you who were long ago at the ITIL Foundation training, or those of you who haven't actually worked with the practice guides, why ITIL 4 evolved from processes to practices. In the shortest possible way, it's explained in this slide, as you can see, but let me add a few words to this. So you know that service management system reference models, such as ITIL or ISO 20000 or sometimes COBIT or various USM, ISM, you name it, SM, are usually process-based models. So we look at some collection of managements, and each management, incident management, problem management, change management, configuration management, service level management, etc., they are known as processes of service management. In ITIL 4, we wanted to highlight that just a process is not enough. Because strictly speaking, a process is a collection of activities which transform inputs into outputs. And in order to establish an effective management capability, incident management, change management, and any of those that I mentioned or not, it's not enough to define a workflow. It's not enough to define a collection of activities and inputs and outputs. Actually, in order to effectively manage, let's say, incidents, the organization needs not only to define the workflow, but also to define roles and responsibilities and ensure that we have sufficient resources in terms of people and support it with relevant automation tools, and also make sure that they are sufficient and effective in terms of automation of the workflow. And there is no single management capability these days which would be totally self-sufficient and limited to the internal resources of the organization. So relationships and dependencies on third parties, partners and suppliers should also be considered. This holistic approach was in ITIL before. ITIL 3 used to talk about people, process, partners, and technologies as key types of resources. But in the new version of ITIL and ITIL 4, we just wanted to highlight that these 4 types of resources are equally important. So we introduced at the foundation level the concept of the 4 dimensions of service management. I already listed them. I will just recap it. It's value streams and processes, organization and people, information and technology, and partners and suppliers. So these 4 dimensions are included in description of each management capability that we are addressing here. Incident management includes 4 dimensions. Change management includes 4 dimensions. Configuration management includes the 4 dimensions. And another thing, processes is an important aspect of each of the practices, and every single practice has more than one process. We will come to details of that later in this presentation. So we evolved from processes to practices. We didn't forget the processes. They are still within the practices, but they are amended and supported with other types of resources. So as I mentioned already, this year, we were working on updating the practice guides. We finally took that opportunity that we kind of prepared for ourselves back in 2019, 2018, when we designed ITIL 4 and decided that practices will be published outside of the core publications. So an update of one practice will not trigger a cascading effect of changes into multiple assets. So we took 15 practices addressed by ITIL Foundation and the most adopted practices, I dare say, across the service management community. And we updated them, amending them and changing some structural elements, and also fixing some errors that we found out from those who have been reading and adopting the practices since 2019. In addition, we also created a training and certification attached to each practice. And by doing this, we also completed finally the ITIL 4 qualification scheme, and I will tell more about this later. So what are the 15 practices that we updated this year? We started with the usual suspects, with the most popular, the most adopted, the most known practices of ITIL and service management, incident management, problem management, service request management, service desk, and monitoring and event management. Together, we call them Monitor, Support, and Fulfill, and we released them in March. So they became publicly available at the beginning of April, and many training providers are also already offering those training. The actual practice guides are not only, of course, available at the training, but also they have been updated in MyAxelis, and everyone with a subscription to MyAxelis has access to all these updated practice guides. Then there was a second batch, which we released in July, and this one included change enablement, deployment management, release management, service configuration management, and IT asset management. And finally, right now, we are finishing the last preparations for release of the third batch. We had some last testing at the end of August, beginning of September. We have been busy processing the feedback from the testing. And finally, we are almost ready to release, hopefully in October, but certainly this autumn, the following practice updates: service level management, supplier management, information security management, relationship management, and continual improvement. Together, it will be 15, and the first 10 are already available. The last 5 will follow very soon. Each practice guide follows the same structure. We really try to make them consistent, and they're easy to follow. And this is why it's actually possible to talk about how to use practice guides today, because once you know how to use one of them, you know how to use all of them. They have the same structure, which, as you can see in this slide, is built around the 4 dimensions: value streams and processes, organization and people, information technology, and partners and suppliers. These 4 dimensions are preceded by what we call general information, which includes the purpose statement for the practice, description of what practice does, key terms and concepts. If it's incident management, that would be incident or event or escalation or prioritization, or workaround. If you think of, let's say, relationship management, it may be types of relationship and various levels of integration between internal and external partners. If it comes to service level management, that would be the concepts of service quality, service level agreement, service catalog, and the like. Utility, warranty, and experience. Then we define the scope, because practices have overlaps and the scoping of practices may be different for different organizations. And some organizations think that incident management and request management are closer than they're described in ITIL. Some organizations combine their IT asset management and service configuration management. Some organizations combine capacity and availability management, for instance. So we need to define the scope, and even importantly, to define what is out of the scope. And if you look for it in, let's say, capacity management, but it's not there, then where you would find it. So the scoping section of each practice guide includes a list of other practices, which may be addressing topics which could be expected to be found in this practice, but in fact will be found in others. Then we come to a very important aspect that we will discuss in more details today, which is the practice success factors. And to them is another important component attached, which is key metrics. Generally, practice success factors is a key element of the practice guides, and not only metrics will be depending on them. We will address that later today as well. Then we proceed to these 4 dimensions, and we will be following the same structure in our today's presentation. And when we finish the partners and suppliers, then we hit the new section that was only added to these 15 updated practices, and which is based on the above mentioned ITIL maturity model. This is why it was important to mention it. And this is a guidance for capability self-assessment and development. So this is a new material which is only becoming available this year to general public, and we will have a look at this again in a few minutes too. And finally, we conclude each practice guide with recommendations for practice success mapped to the ITIL guiding principles. So let's have a closer look at all this, and we will start with practice success factors. I will be using 2 or 3 practices as examples here. So there is a lot of screenshots and examples in the following slides, which are taken from the respective practice guides. And I will try explaining how each of the elements can be actually used in the real life in your practical application in your organization. So when we were designing the practices, we defined for each practice an important concept, an important element, which we called practice success factors. Practice success factors can be seen as sub-practices or sub-capabilities, can be seen as the necessary functional units, functionality of the practice, something that is necessary for the practice to achieve its purpose, regardless of how you design the practice, regardless of how you implement the practice. The purpose of incident management practice is to minimize the negative impact of incidents on organization and the business. And in order to achieve this purpose, in order to fulfill this purpose, any organization, whether it's following ITIL in their incident management or any other source of knowledge, we are sure they have to detect incidents as early as possible, resolve incidents as quickly as possible, and continually improve the way they do it, learning lessons from this detection and resolution and reusing them. So early detection, quick resolution, and continual improvement. If your organization is doing these 3 things, then your organization most likely will be fulfilling the purpose of the incident management practice. So minimizing negative impact of incidents on the business. If you miss one of them, then the chances to continually fulfill the purpose will be decreasing. If you don't detect incidents early but you resolve them quickly, you already have some impact of these incidents because there is a time between the incidents happening and them being detected and them being resolved. If you detect incidents early but don't resolve them quickly, then sorry, you still have a lot of impact. You know about the incidents, but you don't mitigate them. You don't resolve them. Finally, if you do the first 2, but you don't continually improve your practice, then you may be quite successful in your practice for a while, but it won't be a sustainable success. And unless you continually improve your incident management by learning and transferring the knowledge and applying the lessons, then you will see how the results, how the key metrics mapped to detection and resolution are deteriorating with time. So if we agree that these key PSFs described in ITIL are correct, then we know what to focus on. And this is the very first thing that you can take from pretty much every practice guide. Have a look at the PSFs, assess whether you are good at doing them. By the way, the ITIL maturity model will help you with that. And if you are not fulfilling one of these PSFs, think of the risks that it can pose and think what you can do better. The next element in each practice guide, to each PSF, we attached metrics. So the key metrics for the practices which are provided in each practice guides are linked to the PSFs. So for instance, for early detection of incidents, the key metrics are the time between incident occurrence and detection and percentage of incidents which are detected not because the victims cried to us, but because we used some monitoring and event management. So we detected incidents ideally before they started affecting users. Maybe we even managed to resolve incidents before they started affecting users. That would be the best scenario. There is a long list of metrics for the second one. I will not be pausing at all of them, on all of them. I'm just trying to illustrate that for each PSF, there is a list of metrics. They are metrics rather than KPIs. They don't have target states. They don't have even target trends because, for example, percentage of incidents resolved automatically as a target value, volume will have, I don't know, 10% in one organization and 50% in another. It really depends on the organization's context and the ability to automate something. Percentage of incidents resolved before being reported by users or noticed by users can be a very high aspirational objective for some organization and something very normal for another. So we provide you with recommendations of what to measure, but it's up to you to decide what values of these measurements are the target or acceptable or non-acceptable for your organization. Finally, continual improvement can be measured in this case, in case of incident management, based on percentage of incident resolved previously using previously identified and recorded solutions. So using knowledge base, percentage of incidents that were following the known resolution models, and therefore their resolution has been optimized and streamlined. Balance between the effectiveness metrics and cost and efficiency and other metrics for incident resolution. So we can measure all PSFs, and each practice guide has these PSFs, and they will not be only needed to define metrics and to define what is important. But even if it was just this, it would already be useful, because then we just, in the rest of the practice guide, we just describe the ITIL version of how to deal with this, how to detect, resolve, and continually improve in the case of incident management. And you can follow other guides if you prefer, or you can combine the following guidance in ITIL with the guidance from other sources. It's up to you, adopt and adapt. But these three things are the cornerstones of each practice. I mean, these three things are the cornerstones of incident management, and each practice has their own cornerstones. Then we proceed to the most obvious and the first expected part. And I mentioned then when it comes to processes, each practice guide includes more than one. The example I'm using here are from change enablement. There are two processes described in change enablement. One of them is called change enablement planning and optimization. The other one is called change lifecycle management. The second one is easy. If you are familiar with change management from any of the previous versions of ITIL, or if you are familiar with change management in any other reference model, you probably have been knowing and doing something like this, from registration to assessment to authorization to planning to realization control, and then finally review and closure, with more or less details, and it can be a bit longer, a bit shorter, but generally the second workflow is very familiar to anyone who is in change management. The first one is something that is implied, but has never been described as an actual process, and it's not a part of the second one. So enablement and planning and optimization of how we manage changes. So initiation of the practice, change review and planning, change model and procedure improvement initiation, change model and procedure update communication. These activities, they enable the second process, but they are not part of the second process. I recommend, it's not in the practice guides, and it's not an official statement in ITIL, but I personally would recommend you thinking of these processes, whether there are two or some practices have as many as four, in the context of plan, do, check, and act. So PDCA cycle, continual improvement. If you manage your organization's ability to manage changes, if you are the owner of this practice, a manager of this practice, whatever you name this role in your organization, then you're responsible for doing the first process here, for ensuring that all your changes have an appropriate approach, have an appropriate model to follow. And then that all actual entities, all items of changes, they all follow the agreed process. So you can think that the second process here, change lifecycle management, is a do part of the change enablement PDCA cycle. And change enablement planning and optimization is a plan, check, and act part of the change enablement practice. Both are important for effective practice. Both should be done. The shorter process here is a cycle. The longer process here is a pipeline, is a linear workflow applying to every change in scope of the practice. And we have similar approach to all of them. And for each of these processes, there is not only a workflow diagram, but for each step, for each activity in the diagram, there is a description of what is done and by whom in a table. Then another important and updated in 2023, so we significantly amended that part, is the section on how each practice contributes to the organization's value streams. The concept of value stream was probably one of the most important additions in ITIL 4, and it's described in such publications as Create, Deliver, and Support at a huge level of details, and it's described in all other publications in one or another way. But now in the practice guides, we added a very important practical focus on them. There is no single reference model for value streams. There is no operating model which lists all value streams which can be conducted in a service organization. Service providers should approach value streams as use cases. But we can come up with some relatively universal examples. And this one is example we have been using in, or let's say, set of examples, which we have been using in each practice guide this year when we were updating them. And this shows us that very likely as a service provider, your organization will have at least these 5 value streams, most likely more, but these are quite universal. One, we can, in the language used in the previous version of IT for IT model, we can use it from incident to resolve, or from detect to resolve, it's called in IT for IT. Another one, request fulfillment. The third one, from requirements to deployment or to release in ITIL terms. Another one, from strategy to portfolio. Also, there is a value stream for ongoing operation, maintenance, and monitoring. Again, it's not an exhaustive list, but it's enough to illustrate how the described practice in each practice guide contributes to the core value streams of a service provider. For example, if you look at the above-mentioned change enablement, remember there was the second process from registration of change to review and closure. It's shaded in gray at the bottom part of this otherwise complicated diagram. And it shows how one process of change enablement contribute to larger workflows of the value streams, multiple value streams in an organization. For instance, if we look at the left-hand side of the diagram and we start with incidents, which can be coming from either monitoring or users, as you can see there, then in order to resolve an incident, we may need a change. Then we register a change and we have RFC and we assess and authorize the change and we proceed to planning of the change. Depending on what needs to be done in order to resolve the incident, we can proceed to just reconfiguring something in the live environment, the lower swim lane of the diagram, and then testing that what we have reconfigured works well, deploying it, testing, releasing, and that will be the end of the change. These activities may be performed as part of other practices, service validation and testing and deployment and infrastructure and platform management, for instance, depending on what we reconfigure. But they are coordinated from change realization control activity of the change lifecycle management process of the change enablement practice. I hope you follow this with me. Another incident, in order to be resolved, may require a change which will start with procurement. In some cases, there will be a change that will require a change in the software, maybe even some development of a patch. So there are many scenarios, as you can see by the number of inputs here, that will require a change. Change is a universal thing, a universal hub for anything change related in our organizations, and therefore it's in the center or at the execution step of many other of many value streams and it's connected to many other practices. And in a similar way, we show in the practice guides how their activities can be integrated in various value streams. And apart from complicated diagrams, there are also very simple tables saying that this is the list of the value streams, like in the previous slide, and what in each of them is done by the practice, what is the role of the practice we describe in each of them. This is a new material. This is new to many people who are not involved in value stream management and mapping and don't think in value streams, and we believe they should. And it's also a new addition to the ITIL practice guide. So it's existing, the updated ones, and the other 19 don't have this part yet. Then, in addition to this, to help using the value stream concept, we describe a very universal steps, very universal workflow of analyzing and planning improvements of a value stream, from identifying the scope and the intended value, and then doing the value stream work. We can use lean techniques such as Gemba work for this, and reflecting and analyzing the findings of this work and creating a to-be value stream, and then planning the improvements and implementing those improvements. And again, in each practice guide, this universal model is supported by how it can be applied in the context of the particular practice. What is the role of this practice in the value streams that we are analyzing, and how we can make sure that this practice is considered during the respective value stream analysis. Again, something that can be taken, implemented, and used to improve integration of the practices, and to make sure that your practices are not working in isolation, but contribute to value creation or value restoration in your organization. The next dimension here is organization and people. We start with describing few, usually one or two, key roles that are key for this practice. And for them, a list of responsibilities, key competences, and also there is a section on organizational solutions for the practice and for positioning the roles. Should there be a team for change enablement? Should this team report to executive management, or should this team report to someone else? Or do we not need change managers because we have product owners in our product-focused organization? These type of questions. Examples of the roles described at this level of detail in each practice guides are on the right-hand side. And some of them may be actually quite surprising and new to you. For instance, in relationship management, apart from our rather known and common role of relationship manager, we highlight that pretty much everyone who is interacting with stakeholders during their journey, whether it's users or customers or regulators, everyone is acting as a relationship agent. Support specialist who is dealing with users is acting as a relationship agent and representing the organization and shaping the image of the organization. And relationship management practice suggests how this can be done in a better way if we really remember of this role, and we include this in the roles and job descriptions of our specialists. So few roles, one or two. We try really not to introduce too many. However, we know that organizations are different. And who is known as incident manager in one organization may be known as someone else in another. These are, after all, roles. So we don't know how you call these people in your organizational structure. So we do two things. First, we describe the key competences for these roles, using a model which lists 5 types of competences: leader, administrator, coordinator, let's say methods expert, and methods and techniques expert, and the technical, or more correctly, subject matter specialist. I will not go into details of this model because we will have a separate webinar on this, how to use it and how to make it work for your organization. And but we use it in our practice guides in the following list of examples, where we map activities of the processes that we described in the previous section to skills and competency profiles, as you can see on the right-hand side. So for instance, in order to do incident registration well, what do I need to know? What do I need to be able to do? I need to have good knowledge of IT service management tools and procedures. That's more or less all. But for classification of incidents, apart from this, I need to understand service design, resource configuration, business impact. I need to have good knowledge of requirements and commitments of incident resolution to categorize, classify incidents correctly. I need to have good knowledge of incidents models to route the incidents correctly. So I need some subject matter knowledge and good coordination and communication skills, which is reflected in the T&C competency profile based on these 5, let's say, high-level competencies. And then in the second column, we see who are usual suspects in your organization. So we don't describe the role of service desk agent in the incident management practice. We don't describe the role of technical specialist with some artificial list of responsibilities for them. You have technical specialists, you more or less know what they do. So these are not clearly defined roles. These are examples of the roles that are likely to exist in many organizations. Not all of them, but some of them you will recognize, and they may be the usual suspects, the first suspects for fulfilling the role responsible for the incident classification activity. So basically, these tables aim to answer a question of who should be doing all this. From the process descriptions in the previous chapter, we know what should be done. Now we know who should be doing it and what is needed in terms of skills, in terms of qualification, in order to fulfill these activities. The next section, the next dimension of service management is information and technology. We started open it with a list of inputs and types of information used in this practice. But it's not a very long and detailed one because these things have been already addressed as inputs and outputs to the processes in 2 chapters below, or 2 chapters above, 2 chapters earlier. So what we do here, we focus on tools mostly. And there are 2 tables in terms of format in every updated practice. And one of them lists types of tools that are typically used and support this practice. And these are universal lists. They can change, like, vary slightly between the practices. So for instance, I don't know, social media tools no, social media monitoring tools will not be appearing in every practice, but workflow management and collaboration tools will appear everywhere. These are generic terms. These are euphemisms. We cannot name names. So we cannot say, for this, you would use ServiceNow, Hornbill, and Freshservice, because there is a long list of potential tools, and because we cannot even say ITSM automation suite, because some of them will have, let's say, configuration management functionality or service level agreements functionality or service catalog functionality. Some of them will not. So we had to define the types of the tools. Even more, if we think of workflow management and collaboration tools, usually we mean ITSM system, because they are workflow management and collaboration tools, and this is their core functionality. They allow predefined or customized workflows, and they help people involved in those workflows to communicate and collaborate and manage records. But if you are using Salesforce for this, it's not an ITSM tool. Or if you are using ERP system, I don't know, SAP for this. Or if you are using something else which is not marketed as ITSM tool. After all, ServiceNow prefer being known as workflow management and collaboration tool, and are competing with or being compared with Salesforce rather than with, let's say, Freshservice. So we couldn't, and we didn't want to name names. If you are attending a training on this, we expect trainers to provide examples. If you are thinking of this in the context of your organization, we expect you to map it to your organization toolset. And analysis and reporting may be external or integrated in your ITSM system. Knowledge management may be external or integrated. It's a matter of types of functionality. Service catalog tools may be separate or integrated. The same with configuration. So what we do, we list these types of tools with some explanations and explain and describe how they can be applied in this particular practice. In this case, it's relationship management. But then we follow the same approach as in the previous chapter with roles and with skills. So we refer back to the activities, all activities of the above mentioned processes and described processes. And for each activity, we suggest types of the tools which will be helpful, the key functionality of those tools, and their impact on the effectiveness of the practice. Some things, let's say SLA negotiation, largely can be done using a round table and a whiteboard, and we can go through most activities of SLA negotiation without significant automation support. But if you think of, let's say, monitoring of fulfillment of SLAs, and you monitor service quality, you cannot do it without good monitoring tools and good reporting tools and feedback gathering tools. So sorry, it's a high dependency on automation for that activity. This is what the right side column is for. So again, we started with defining processes and activities in chapter focused on value streams and processes. Then we described skills and competencies for each activity in the second practice, in the second chapter, and then we now proceed to describing possible automation solutions for each of the activities of each process. Finally, I mentioned previously that we cannot afford not thinking of our partners and suppliers. So what we describe is dependencies on the practice and suppliers. So incident management involves, or most likely will involve, third parties in incident resolution. How we manage them, how we ensure that they follow our incident resolution timelines and objectives. How do we share information with them? Do they work in our system, or we work in their system, or our systems exchange information? That sort of questions should be addressed here. And also we describe how third parties can support this particular practice, usually in from three sides and three aspects: participation in the practice activities, provision of software tools, and consulting and advisory. Of course, we do address possible involvement of service integration and management here, and the role of service integrator compared to regular suppliers. Of course, we consider internal and external service provision as on the top side of the diagram on the slide. Now we finished the 4 dimensions and we reached the capability assessment and development. What is here? The ITIL maturity model, by the way, the overview of the model is freely accessible. If you just Google Axelos maturity model overview, you will be able to download this document, which is on the screen. It provides 2 perspectives for the assessment. One, maturity of the service value system, or if you like, of service governance and management system. We don't go there now because in the context of a particular practice, it's not relevant. Another important aspect is the capability assessment based on individual practices. For each practice, we have a set of criteria which are currently used by our consulting partners when they conduct official certification assessments of their clients. But now we made this criteria available for every user of the practice guide for the particular practice. Importantly, this model is not focused on how you implement a title. It's focused on how well you develop your service management. And it is applicable to organizations who have been developing their service management using our other sources of knowledge, previous versions of ITIL or other guidance, other bodies of knowledge. It's not ITIL specific, although of course it's using ITIL language. So for capability assessment, we defined for each practice, as you know, we defined practice success factors. And for each practice success factors, we defined criteria at levels from 2nd to 5th. And we mapped these criteria to the 4 dimensions of service management as well. And this is just one example. Remember that practice success factor of detecting incidents early. So if we want to assess this capability, this practice success factor, using the assessment criteria from that model, and they are provided in the practice guides, then we go through these criteria, which are on the screen. We provide evidence to ourselves. We make sure that we do not cheat ourselves on this. And then we define at which level this PSF is currently, and what are the improvement opportunities and what are the risks of not meeting certain criteria. Similar criteria are defined for each of the PSFs, and there is a recommendation on self-assessment, and our next masterclass will be purely focused on how to use this element of the practice guides, how to conduct self-assessment of your practices using the provided materials, and how to plan your improvements based on this. So I will not be going further in this topic right now, especially given the time, but this is an interesting rabbit hole, and we will have a journey into that rabbit hole very soon at the next masterclass. And it's not only about assessment. There is also a set of recommendations on how you develop your practice capabilities using the same model, using the results of assessment, and using the practice guides. Because if you look at the words on these, let's say, stairs at each level, which is described from purpose and objectives to stakeholders and resources to process and activities, and further up to continual improvement, you will map it even now after this presentation, even if you haven't seen any practice guide before, you will map it to the content of the practice guide, because the practice guides actually help developing your management capabilities. And finally, the closing part there is a list of recommendations for the practice success, which are mapped to the ITIL 4 guiding principles. It's a table, usually, it's a long one, and it has 3 columns, unlike the one on the screen. So between the recommendations and the supporting guiding principles, there is usually a middle column, which has a lot of details about why exactly and how exactly for incident management. Looking at the incidents from the service consumer perspective is important and how it can be realized. How gathering and reusing data in your incident management will help. How developing the practice continually but not overcomplicating it will help. How to keep things simple and practical in incident management. So this is a summary of the practice guide and of each practice guide, and it provides you with some actionable recommendations mapped to the ITIL guiding principles. It's another important thing, and if you again want to just take two simple things from the practice guide, look at the practice success factors and at this final chapter with recommendations. But then when you will be starting thinking, okay, how exactly I do it, read the rest. As I mentioned, we not only updated the practice guides, we also released new practice modules, practice-based certification and training modules. They are on the left-hand side of the main part of this diagram. They are grouped in these batches of 5. They are available as individual one-day training per practice with a certification and a little exam at the end, or as a 3-day 5-practice batch from our training partners. And they lead to the new designation, which is called ITIL Practice Manager. And as it's illustrated on the left-hand side here, you can take an express route in a pre-packaged 3-day training. You can also go for the all stops, calling at all stations, and are spreading this 5-practice knowledge or mixing the practices between the batches. So if you go, for instance, for, let's say, 5 practices, I don't know, incident service desk from the left, change and configuration from the right, and service level management from the top of this left-hand side diagram. Let's highlight it like this. Then wonderful, you are actually already collecting 5 practices. And why 5 practices is wonderful? Because 5 practices combined with CDS, Create, Deliver, and Support, will lead you to the Practice Manager designation. And why is that good? Because Practice Manager designation combined with Managing Professional and Strategic Leader designation will make you an ITIL Master. This is a topic for another webinar, how and why you want to become an ITIL Master. We are not going there now. But what I'm trying to say is that these practice modules not only provide a flexible, short, affordable training opportunity, but also contribute to your professional development, to your career, and to your certification path. And that, I believe, was all I wanted to say. But before we jump to a few questions, because I'm over the time, I want to say that it's not the last one. Vicky mentioned in the beginning, it's the first webinar of the series. So these 4 guys, left to the right, Dmitry Saichenko, Senior Product Manager at PeopleCert, myself, Senior Architect for ITIL, Adam Griffiths on the right-hand side, who is an architect for ITIL, and David Cannon. If you don't know David Cannon, Google David Cannon, who is our advisor and lead editor of a few publications of ITIL. We will be delivering the following masterclasses. Mostly it will be Adam and I. but we will be joined by Dmitry to discuss the competency model. We will be joined by David to discuss the collaborate, assure, and approve batch of the practices, the last 5. And each of these webinars, each of these masterclasses will add will add one CPD point to your CPD collection efforts. And this is where I should have been about 10 minutes ago, but we still have a little time for Q&A. I don't see the questions yet, but I see that in Q&A section we have a badge which says 78. It would account for another couple of hours, but let's at least address some of them. Adam, which we should start with?
It has been a flurry of questions, which I've been happy to see. One that I would like to bring to the conversation, Roman, actually 2 questions that I think are very similar. The first asks, could you distinguish between PSF, so practice success factor, CSF, so critical success factor, and KPI?
Oh, yes. So PSF is a practice CSF. We generally avoid using CSF and ITIL. It's mentioned in the DPI book once, but generally we don't actively use this term, just because when we were researching for ITIL update, we found out that it's largely misused and there is a lot of confusion and arguments about what CSFs are. So we generally avoided using them. And the question asking to distinguish between CSFs and KPIs actually illustrates that confusion. So PSF is a success factor, critical success factor for the practice, but we just avoid actively using the term CSF. The KPIs are important metrics which illustrate performance and achievements. So you take important, therefore key metric, you add to that metric target value, sometimes more than one, because it can be a target interval, but for simple scenario target value, maybe you add some threshold value and you decide that this value of the metric means that things are good. This interval of the values means that things are tolerable but not so good. And this interval of metric values means that things are not going well. And you react accordingly. So KPI is an important metric which is used to indicate the state of the managed object and its performance and its success. And unlike just metric, it has value which are set as a target and maybe values which are set as a threshold. KPIs are made of metrics, and KPIs are used to track performance, and therefore they are often connected to CSFs. So KPIs connected to critical success factors would illustrate whether certain success factor is being fulfilled or not. I hope I didn't add confusion, but removed it.
Thanks, Roman, very much. Our next question comes from someone whose name I recognize. Hi, Pearl. The question is, what's the reasoning behind having a PSF of continually improving a particular practice, such as in incident management? If continual improvement should be applied everywhere, shouldn't there be a similar PSF in all the practices?
That's a great question. It may be a sign of a little of inconsistency, but to be honest, incident management being the very first practice when we developed it, and continual improvement being one of the very last ones when we were developing it, we didn't see that as an inconsistency risk. We might need to improve it in the future. At the same time, we know that many organizations start with incident management, the ITSM journey, and they pay attention to continual improvement as a practice and continual improvement as part of their management system a bit too late. So we really found it important to emphasize the importance of this element of the practice, that incident management should not be focused on just firefighting. It should be also including an element of training the firefighters. And we consider it important enough for that particular case. I admit it is a bit of inconsistency there, but we believe that it brings more value than removes.
Thank you
Thank you very
very
much.
much, Roman. I'm sure Adam has a lot more questions lined up to answer, but unfortunately I have to play the bad cop in this and say we have come to the end of our time. I would like to thank everybody. It's wonderful to see the number of questions coming in, but not just questions, practical suggestions for improvement and new ideas around practices, requests for new features on my Axelos. So there is a huge amount for myself, Roman and Adam, but also our my Axelos team to work through as well. So as we've said throughout this is the first, number one, so 7 to go in our series of 8. So we look forward to seeing many of you back here for round 2. We will work through the questions, we will try to pick up and respond to the feedback, all of those sorts of things. Please do take your time. There's a very short survey as the webinar closes, so please do take your time to share your thoughts with us and suggestions for future webinars. But what can I say? Absolutely fantastic presentation. Thank you so much, Roman. And Adam, I've never seen so many questions answered in an hour. Brilliant, thank you, and I'm sure that all of our attendees appreciate it. So all that remains is for me to say thank you very much to the team behind the scenes who make these webinars happen, but finally and most importantly, thank you to all of those who've taken an hour out of your day to join us today, and we hope very much to see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.